Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Black-Liberation.Tech podcast. I am your host, Dr. Renée Jordan, and today we're going to take a look at a blog post from March 2021, and it is entitled Flexibility. So let's take a read and then talk about it. Flexibility. After submitting a 158-page draft of my prospectus to my advisor, I am down 30 pages as a result of comments and feedback, but all is not lost. I simply moved those pages to other Word documents to save for later. It doesn't mean that the information was not good, it's just not for now. And so, as I let go of a theoretical framework, I find myself gaining exposure to another methodology. While attending the prospectus defense of another Ph.D. student on February 18th, the candidate shared that she was interested in using Daughtering, Evans Winters 2019. In her case study. It was the title of her prospectus, which included Black women composers, that made me curious enough to mark my calendar and attend her online defense. And it was her description of a methodology rooted in Black feminism that made me all the more curious. Things that make you go, So when I read amongst the comments and feedback from my dissertation co-chair a week later and saw a suggestion to consider humanizing research, decolonizing qualitative inquiry, I started to thumb through my repertoire. After not being inspired by what I had, I remembered Daughtering, looked it up, gave it a thumb through, and saw that it talked about decolonizing knowledge. It also had a chapter called Decolonizing the Mind. Clearly, this book was another connection to something that was of timely interest to me. And so I downloaded a digital copy of the book from the library. I must say, Georgia State University has some of the best resources. Black Feminism and Qualitative Inquiry, a mosaic for writing our daughter's body, Dr. Venus E. Evans Winters. Whether it works out or not, time will tell. It is an experiment after all. This life requires flexibility like a good jam session. That is all. Carry on. So that blog post was March of 2021. My prospectus defense actually took place in April of 2021. So this was a month turnaround. And I must say, it took letting go. It also required me to do more research and try something new, something that I was not able to test out before in terms of one of my qualitative research classes as a method of analysis. And so because of the stagnation and stuckness, if you will, that I was feeling at the moment, I was willing to try something new, something different, and take on the task of working it out as I went. And so that worked out for me. Now, let's talk about what that blog post means and how it connects to both research and life, especially for those of us having to navigate complex academic or professional spaces. In research, flexibility can be a power tool. It allows us to adapt, adjust, and make space for new methods, ideas, or paths that may have once seemed unimportant or distant. For me, that flexibility meant shedding 30 pages of a draft, not because they weren't valuable, but because they weren't right for that time. And it doesn't mean that I gave up on them altogether. I just simply saved them for later. Sometimes that's the hardest part, accepting that not everything fits within our current framework or timeline. But what happens when you let go of one thing and make space for another? You might find yourself opening a door to something much bigger than what you initially imagined. That's what happened to me when I came across The Doddering Methodology by Dr. Venus E. Evans Winters. Her approach is rooted in Black feminism, and it piqued my curiosity as it highlighted a decolonized perspective of knowledge. Now, for those of you who might be wondering, whenever someone's talking about a decolonized perspective, they're talking about a non-Western approach. I don't know if you remember, but one of the things that made me laugh in Black Panther was when the sister looked at the man and called him a colonizer. And so this is an example of a decolonized perspective, something that was immediately relevant to the suggestions that I received about humanizing and decolonizing research in my own work. This experience reminds me of something that often comes up when we talk about technology: the need to stay flexible as we navigate an ever-changing landscape. Whether it's a shift in project, the addition of a new tool, or rethinking how we engage with a community, flexibility is a key ingredient to success. It's the same principle in our academic work. If we hold on to one way of doing things, we might miss an opportunity to evolve, experiment, and grow. And then there's the aspect of being open to experimentation. Research, like any creative process, is an experiment. You never really know where it will lead. If you did, it wouldn't be research. But it's that openness to new possibilities that can spark groundbreaking work. At the time, I did not know if doddering would be the methodology that I would ultimately use, but engaging with it allowed me to be open-minded about new ways of thinking, new ways of approaching research, new ways of data collection, data analysis, and being able to articulate my findings. I did ultimately use doddering in my final dissertation, and I'm glad that I did. It allowed me to look at my data in a way that aligned more closely with the African philosophy, Ubuntu, that I was using in my work. It also complemented the poetic transcription that I also incorporated into my case study. I love the metaphor I used in this blog post: life as a jam session. For those of you who may not know, a jam session is an impromptu musical gathering where musicians come together to play freely, often creating beautiful, spontaneous music. That's exactly what flexibility feels like to me. And that is one of the gifts and talents that I must say I possessed as a result of being creative. I'm able to move with the changes. I'm able to be open to new ways of doing things. I'm able to consider other pathways and options so that I don't get stuck and so that I can make progress on whatever it is I'm doing. In this case, it was my perspectives. I had to keep moving. I was working on a timeline. I needed to be done with everything by May 2022, and this was March 2021. And so flexibility was the way I was able to prevail and get through everything. I had to essentially flip my original proposal upside down in order to make it fit the current circumstances we were under as it related to the COVID-19 pandemic and keep up with my timeline. It's like improvising with the flow of life, taking what comes and making the best of it. In a jam session, not every note may fit, but the end result can still be magical. So for those of you out there who might be feeling the weight of sticking to rigid plans, I encourage you to be a little bit more like that jam session. Let go of what no longer works. If you don't have the time to do an ethnography, it's time to let that go. See what other options are out there that will allow you to work within your time constraints, as well as the restraints that you have as it relates to data. You might want to consider multiple ways of collecting data so that you can cast your net wide, and then whatever you're able to pull in, work from that point, as opposed to sticking to something narrow. And as a result of throwing out a narrow net, you're not able to collect as much data as you intended, you wanted, or desired. So think about how you can be flexible in order to make the most out of the time you have left in your program, as well as any deadlines that you need to keep in mind as you move forward. There's deadlines as it relates to IRB proposals. There's going to be deadlines as it relates to the time in which you'll have to collect data. There's going to be deadlines that you need to create in order to work on your dissertation and to communicate your progress with your committee so that they know that you are moving at a pace that will set you up for success. Don't be afraid to experiment, and don't hold back when you feel a new idea calling you. Embrace the unknown with curiosity. Here are a few questions that I want you to think about. How have you had to adapt or be flexible in your own work or life recently? What was the outcome of that flexibility? What methodologies or frameworks have you explored in your research or projects that were unexpected but enriching? How do you approach the balance between sticking to a plan and being open to experiment or change? Feel free to leave your comments in the place where comments can go on the Black-Liberation.Tech social media pages. This next segment will provide you with a little bit more information as it relates to the dissertation process. Now, when you are working on your dissertation, it's important to set actionable goals. Start with the end in mind. Think about how long you have until you graduate. Now, for me, I took 7 years. My initial goal was to get it done in 4. But as I did the work of research and I presented the work related to my graduate research assistantship, and as I attended the dissertation prospectus of others, reality began to set in that I still had work to do. So after 3 years of working on my thoughts as it related to my final project and completing my comprehensive exams and coming up with a plan as it related to what I wanted to do with my project, it all changed. Why? The COVID-19 pandemic hit, and as a result, I no longer wanted to push the issue of an after-school program for my dissertation project. Instead of exploring how students used, enhanced, and developed their technology skills and digital literacies in the after-school program, I jumped ahead to the adults and I interviewed them, and I also asked for artifacts that allowed me to explore how they went about learning and enhancing their technology skills and digital literacies. So, because I had worked so diligently on my previous project during my comprehensive exams, I was able to turn it on its head and do it from a different angle and still hit all the major points that I was interested in, but from the standpoint of collecting retroactive data, so having the participants to reflect and share with me how they went about learning technology and using their digital literacies. So the timeline also allowed me to move a little faster. I gave myself over the summer to work on collecting data as well as transcribing that data to get back to my participants so that they can review it and let me know if there were any corrections. Not only did I give them access to the transcripts, I also asked for clarity when it came to specific instances when they were naming individuals who were references, if you will, or points of reference, when they were naming organizations, as well as naming any technology tools or platforms that I was not familiar with to make sure that I got it right. Now, the reason it's important to note that I did that in 8 weeks, it's because at the end of 8 weeks, I needed to be able to move on and not have to go back and forth with the participants to make sure that I had everything right. I needed to set it and make it a priority. So it would have been bad if I did not check the transcripts before starting my coding process. Oh my goodness. That would have been terrible. Because can you imagine? I was coding all the way up until at least February, if not later, of 2022. And I collected the data over the summer of 2021. Can you imagine trying to find a participant in February and ask them about what they said over the summer of the year before? That is too far of a gap. Now, would it be possible? Yes. But would it have been fresh on their mind? Would they have the time? I already gave them the time period in which I said that I would be in communication with them, and they were kind enough to volunteer to participate in my research project. I needed to make sure that I had everything down packed when it came to engaging with them, so that when I said, "Thank you for your participation. I'll share with you my final manuscript once it's done," that was the next time that they were going to hear from me, and not having to go back to, by the way, do you remember when we interviewed back in July? Could you please tell me if this is the correct name of that university that you indicated in your interview? That would not be a good look professionally, and it also would not be a good look in terms of me having to revisit something with someone that I said that I was already done talking to for the moment. So those actionable goals could be: when do you need to have your data collected? When do you need to have your transcripts cleaned and returned for feedback if you're going to provide them with feedback? Keep in mind, anything that you do with the data, you need to make sure is included in your IRB proposal. So in my IRB proposal, I did include the fact that I would be reaching back out to participants so that they could have a chance to review the transcript and provide any edits or corrections. And then I would take those edits and corrections and include them as a part of my data so that I could see where the changes took place. So instead of just deleting something that I wrote initially, it would have a single line through it, a single strike through it, with the correction, so that when I went to code it, I would have the correct information in place when coding. Other deadlines and goals that you need to set would be draft submissions to your chair and co-chair. You need to make sure that you have a general understanding as it relates to how your committee members will provide you with feedback. I've said it before, I was able to do short presentations, 10 slides at a time, with my department chair who served as a co-chair on my committee. And I was also able to do short presentations with my off-campus committee member. My off-campus committee member was someone who was familiar with the African philosophy Ubuntu that I was using firsthand, and he also specialized in instructional design and instructional technology as it related to culture-specific design. And so he was able to add his expertise to my committee. At the time, we did not have anyone in my department who specialized specifically in that African philosophy, as well as instructional design and instructional technology as it related to culture-specific design. My methodologist, who was my qualitative research professor and co-chair of my committee, also had expertise in the African philosophy as well as qualitative research. And so she was able to bring those expertise to add to my committee. With my research methodologist, I was able to meet with her and go over short stints of my dissertation, both the proposal and the actual dissertation, so that she could review the text and give me feedback. And then I would also do the short presentations with her so she could see how I was approaching my study and my progress. Now, my last committee member, he specialized in Black education and specifically special education. And so instead of doing short presentations with him and going over drafts of my proposal and dissertation, he actually waited until I submitted the completed final document for the committee's review before my defenses in order to provide me feedback during the questioning time and providing other additional questions to my chair to provide to me for corrections and consideration. So in addition to being flexible in terms of recognizing your time commitments, you need to be flexible as it relates to your committee members. You need to consider what they're willing to do and how they're willing to work with you. Respect that, as well as incorporate the feedback that they provide you. I mentioned that I removed 30 pages. They told me, Renee, this is too much. You can't do all of this and expect to graduate anytime soon. You have to clean it up and simplify it in order to make it succinct and clear, and you can work on those other aspects at another time. You'll have a lifetime to work on your research. Right now, we are trying to help you get through your dissertation, and the best dissertation, as they said, is a done dissertation. And so you don't have to save the world with your dissertation all at one time. You can come back to it, chip away at it, work on it, and continue to work on it after you graduate. Now, other deadlines that you need to consider include university deadlines. You need to know it for your department. You need to know it for your college. You need to know it so that when you apply for graduation, you're applying based upon the deadlines that they set. Most of the time, you have to apply. If you're graduating in the spring, you have to apply by the fall or even before the fall semester starts. Check with your graduate research office. Find out when those timelines are. Find out when you have to submit your prospectus, which is your dissertation proposal. Find out when you have to submit your dissertation, because the chances are there's a series of signatures that have to be met before you can do your actual defense. And in my case, those signatures included the dean of the school. So that meant I had to make sure that everything that needed to be signed off, including my abstract, which had a certain word limit, which was also defined by the actual college and not necessarily our department, had to be met. Make sure you're meeting all of the expectations and requirements. So not just for your department, not just for your committee, but also for the actual college that's signing off on your work as well. So make sure you address the college and university deadlines and incorporate those in your plans to finish. Make sure that you take the time to break down this large task of completing a dissertation into smaller, manageable pieces. What does that look like? Well, you can start with an outline. So for my dissertation, there was a template that was used. Now, how it gets filled in is up to you, but there were distinct sections that were required. And as a result, that allowed me to take a look at my dissertation in smaller pieces. And so for the proposal, I needed to have chapters 1, 2, and 3 complete. And chapter 1 was the introduction, chapter 2 was the literature review, and chapter 3 covers my methodology, my research methodology. So how would I go about my data collection and analysis process? So with the introduction, it was nice to start there, but that introduction changed more over time than the actual literature review. So don't hold yourself to having to fill out your proposal or even your dissertation in a linear fashion. It's okay to jump around. You have your outline in place so that things are in order, but yes, you can jump around. You might need to read more. You might need to cover more in your literature review before you're able to create a succinct introduction that gets to the so what of your proposal or your dissertation. People need to know before they get to the literature review why your work is important. Who should consider your work? How do you expect your work to impact the discipline in which you work? The field, the knowledge base. Are you taking a look at another perspective of a phenomenon? Or are you exploring something that is not talked about at all? Why is your work important? By breaking up my proposal and my dissertation into smaller pieces, it allowed me to not feel overwhelmed. It's one thing for me to work on my research methodology so that I can say, this is how I plan to collect the data, and be able to revisit things based on my final decisions. And then after a good review of the literature, I had a better idea of how I wanted to move as it related to my chapter 3 and my chapter 1. And so feel free to jump around. Feel free to do one bit or piece at a time. You don't have to sit down and go from page 1 to page 30. You can hop around because you'll have your outline that creates the linear order that others will need in order to review your work. And at times, people will actually jump around themselves and decide what is it about your work that they actually want to read. Are they interested in seeing what work you reference? Are they going to make sure that you have the critical scholars in your literature before they decide to read your work? So are there people that you have to address in order to show that you have done the scholarly work of research and considered those who came before you and what they brought? Or perhaps they are looking for a research methodology to help themselves out. Like I said, I went to the prospectus and dissertation defense of someone else who used daughtering in their work. They were in music education. I was in learning sciences. However, because I saw the title of her work and I read her abstract, I realized that she might have something that I could glean from, and that I did. I learned about daughtering, and I did end up using daughtering in my final dissertation. I want to encourage you to remain flexible with your goals. Life, research, and unexpected challenges might push timelines or necessitate goal adjustments. It's important to maintain a balance between setting goals and being open to changes. Don't allow changes to cause you to quit. I had never experienced a pandemic before, and there was a lot going on. A lot. And when there is a lot going on, it's okay to reevaluate what it is that you're doing and pick out what's most important and focus on that. For me, what was most important was finding out how others, specifically Latinas, Afro-Latinas, and Black women, were able to get to these technology-saturated industries in order to help me learn what I could do to help someone else. And as a result, I did learn. And furthermore, I continue to learn. The Black-Liberation.Tech website is an open educational resource that is the direct result from my dissertation. I said I wanted to learn so I could share it with others, and that's exactly what I'm doing. So when there's, once again, a lot going on, pick out what's most important. Figure out what is manageable in the amount of time that you have. Be flexible, be open. Don't try to do everything all at once. It's okay to just focus on a small part and work on that and work on it well. I earned the Outstanding Dissertation Award in April of 2023 as a result of my work. And so the Department of Learning Sciences, the College of Education, recognized me for having an outstanding dissertation. And I was very proud of that because it took me a long time. I took the full 7 years to complete my dissertation. I worked full time the whole time and finished my dissertation in 7 years. I did graduate research assistantships. I taught online, so I did graduate teaching assistantships. I was able to present at least 10 times on my work as it related to what I was doing with my advisor in an after-school program, as well as my own work that came about as a result of my writing manuscript class with my research methodologies. So find out what's most important, focus on that, do that part well, and get your stuff done. You can do it. When you're choosing a committee, make sure that they align with your research goals. Make sure that they have the expertise needed to say, yes, Renee has got this. She is hitting all the points. She is demonstrating that she is an expert as it relates to doing the work of research. Make sure that they're able to give you the level of support that you need. Consider faculty members that bring different perspectives. So like I said, I had my advisor from my department who was also the department chair. So he signed off on my documents twice, once as my advisor and once as the department chair. So that helped me with getting my things signed off on. My co-chair was my qualitative research professor who saw my work ahead of time. And that was one of her requirements. You had to have taken a class with her, and she needed to see that you were a serious student and a scholar with integrity. And she needed to see that because she gave a lot of feedback. Everyone is not going to give you the same level of feedback before you submit your proposal and before you submit your dissertation, because technically they have whatever amount of time that the school has identified. In my case, it was 2 or 3 weeks that they had to review my work. So technically, they really didn't have to review my work until I submitted it for that review time before the prospectus defense and before the dissertation defense. But she was kind enough to actually read pages of my work at a time and provide me with direct feedback so that I could make adjustments before I submitted my proposal and my dissertation. With my advisor and my outside committee member, they were kind enough to allow me to do 10 slide at a time presentations to go over what I was doing. And in those 10 slides, I had diagrams that essentially showed my thought process. They were visual depictions of my work that allowed me to talk to them about what I was doing and my plans. And then they were able to provide me feedback based on that. Those same presentations and slides I also provided to my co-chair, my research methodologist. And then my other committee member who had expertise of his own that he brought, he decided that he would wait until it was cleared by my dissertation co-chairs for submission before he would review it. So he reviewed it during the 2 to 3 week time period. And all of those were beneficial to me because I was able to walk away with feedback that allowed me to make great strides in my work. And I will never forget, it was the day before my dissertation defense, and I got final comments back from my co-chair / research methodologist. And she said, Renee, I could tell you worked really hard on this, but what does this mean as an instructional designer? Referring to my discussion. What does this mean to someone who's an educator? How will they take what you've done and apply it to the design of an informal after-school program? And as a result, I was able to change a few words on a slide that allowed my brain to translate what I was talking about in the theoretical sense to practical application. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a moment to show you those few changes. It was like after I made that change, I was able to make subsequent changes so that I was able to articulate exactly what my work meant for instructional designers as well as educators. All right, so what I'm going to do a comparison. I'm going to show you what I had on my slide as of April 10th, 2022. So here you can see I have contributors' recommendations, and just take a look at this legend, if you will, down at the bottom. So down at the bottom, I have Ubuntu/Ubuntu, well-being, and who counts as human. I have bueno, what type of learning leads to becoming humane. And so you can see that I have it color coded. And so in terms of well-being, I'm just going to quickly go through this for those who are just listening and they're not actually watching. I have well-being, acquire more space for program, acquiring more money for programs, give them computers and smartphones, develop content and resources in Spanish and other languages, either translate or provide translators. So I attributed those to well-being. Who counts as human? I said students' voices in every aspect of decision making, giving them a chance to also help you outline the curriculum. Do not be dismissive of people. Do not count them out. Understand who your audience is and how they relate to information best. You don't need to go from A to B to C to D in order to learn technology. And then market segmentation. So that is what I attributed to who counts as human. Now, this next section, bueno, what type of learning leads to becoming humane? I said workshops that use design thinking, develop critical thinking, use the technology as a tool to refine or to finish, but not as a tool to understand problems. Expose girls and women to coding and building hardware and software. And then to duplicate efforts, if you will, I also attributed understanding who your audience is and how they relate to information best, as well as you don't need to go from A to B to C to D in order to learn technology. I attributed those as well to bueno, what type of learning leads to becoming humane. Okay, so that was what I provided my research methodologist with. Now revisit her comment in terms of, Renee, what does this mean for an instructional designer or an educator who is designing an informal after-school program? So based on her feedback, the light bulb went off. Those 3 items on the bottom of that slide changed. And I changed it to implementation needs, women and girls as co-constructors, and then design and skill considerations. And so now the implementation needs as it relates to instructional designers and educators, they need to acquire more space for programs. They need to acquire more money for programs. They need to give them computers and smartphones. They need to develop content and resources in Spanish and other languages. They also need to either translate or provide translators. So those are implementation needs. Women and girls as co-constructors. This is what instructional designers and educators need to consider as it relates to women and girls as co-constructors. Students' voices in every aspect of decision making. They need to be incorporated. Give them a chance to also help you outline the curriculum. Do not be dismissive of people. Do not count them out. Understand who your audience is and how they relate to information best. You do not need to go from A to B to C to D in order to learn technology. And then market segmentation in terms of recruitment, knowing who your market is composed of. And then the third point, design and skill considerations. These are things that instructional designers and educators need to consider when they're designing informal learning opportunities. They need to use the technology as a tool to refine or to finish, but not as a tool to understand problems. They need to expose girls and women to coding and building hardware and software. They need workshops that use design thinking, and they also need to develop critical thinking. Now, the other two aspects that doubled over before, they still double over again as it relates to design and skill considerations. Understand who your audience is and how they relate to information best. You do not need to go from A to B to C to D in order to learn technology. And so I shared that comparison between those two slides to hopefully hit on the point or the notion that you need to be flexible when you're doing the work of research. Take in the feedback that your committee members are giving to you and think about what you need to do in order to make your work crystal clear so there's an educative aspect to your dissertation. By the time someone reads your dissertation, they should walk away like it was a lesson from you. They should now understand, oh, as a result of Renée doing her dissertation, she learned information from Latinas, Afro-Latinas, and Black women in tech, how they learn technology and demonstrated their digital literacy so that she can then inform others, herself and others, instructional designers and educators, on things that should be considered when they are designing informal after-school programs. So I talked about the best practices. I talked about being flexible and taking in feedback. Here are some of the worst things you can do, some of the red flags, if you will. Choosing committee members based on personal relationships or convenience rather than qualifications or fit for the dissertation topic. So just because you had someone as a professor does not automatically make them the best committee member for your dissertation. I had a professor for my seminar course, and she encouraged me to submit my work to a conference that was at Georgia Tech, and I got in and I was accepted. But when I was looking for that last committee member, she recognized that my work included qualitative research. And so when I asked her, she suggested that I find someone who specialized or had more knowledge of qualitative research because she focused on quantitative research and felt that someone else could do a better job. So just because that faculty member was an encouragement to me, helped me to get my work out there in terms of being able to present what I was doing. She was in the audience while I was there cheering me on, and it was good. And although I knew her, I had her in one of my classes. I did one of my internships with her. That did not automatically make her a good match for my dissertation. Now, if I couldn't find anybody else, she might have said yes, but instead of saying yes, she encouraged me to find someone else. And so I want to encourage you to do the same. Think about the different aspects of your dissertation. So your expertise within your field, the type of methodology you're doing or the type of study. Are you doing a quantitative study? Are you doing a qualitative study? Are you using mixed method? Does your department have someone who is a methodologist, someone who is well versed in the various methodologies that are available, the various methods of collecting data, the various methods of analyzing data? Does your department have a methodologist? Our department did not provide the actual research classes. We had to go to education policy studies in order to take our research classes. So both our quantitative and our qualitative research classes. And so I reached out to the person who served as my professor for my qualitative research classes to be on my committee, and she said yes. And so that was a bonus to me because while my advisor also did qualitative research methodologies and quantitative research methodologies, she was able to provide expertise as it related to various forms of qualitative research that he was not as familiar with or familiar with at all. And because he respected her as a professional and knew that she did quality work and would not sign off on something that was not legitimate, something that was not done well, then he was confident with having her on my committee in order to serve as an expert as it related to my chosen research methodologies. Now, you also don't want to wait until the last minute to get your committee together. So for my proposal, I needed to have everyone in place. And that required me to find one more committee member because I had my three, my advisor, my research methodologist who served as the co-chair, and my outside committee member because I met him during my first year. He served as a mentor to one of my classmates. And so I was able to get him on my committee. And so he was on my committee when I did my comprehensive exams. And so I needed to find a fourth committee member to fill out my committee for my proposal and my dissertation. And I was able to do so by digging and asking questions. Our department had recently merged with some other departments that included special education. And so I was able to look amongst the new faculty I was able to look amongst the faculty who are now a part of our department and find my fourth person. I asked my committee members who were at my school ahead of time about whether or not it would be okay to ask this individual, and they gave their approval. And as a result, I was able to reach out to him and ask if he would join my committee, and he said yes. So in addition to making sure that your committee members align with your discipline and your selected research methodologies, as well as the philosophies that you're learning as it relates to, for those in education, learning theories as well as ontologies, epistemologies, and the like. Make sure that you have people who are open and willing to look at different ways of knowing and being if you are not using Western philosophies. That's all I'm going to say about that. And so those who were on my committee were open, willing, and had expertise in other ways of knowing and being. And that was very helpful as it related to me being able to make progress on my proposal and my dissertation. You also need to be flexible as it relates to choosing your committee members. If someone is not responsive, that's someone who you might not want to have on your committee, because you need to know that they have eyes on your work in terms of responding to you. So whether that's, hey, I got your message and I need 2 weeks, or hey, I got your email and I need you to do something else before I read it, you want to make sure that they're responsive. And one way to test that out is to see how responsive they are if you have a class with them and you're emailing them questions. You want to have someone who's going to get back to you. You can also determine the level of feedback that you'll receive based on the feedback they give you on the work that you do in their classes. So if someone gives you feedback that you can actually act on and apply to the next assignment that you do, and as a result come out better, then that is someone who you really might want to consider to have on your committee. It's one thing for someone to fill out a rubric and to give you comments. It's something else for someone to give you feedback on how you can strengthen the scholarship behind your work in order to make a better argument or create a clearer picture for your audience. I'll give this example. Someone in our class was writing about a situation and trying to explain. They were observing a class that had an active learning setup, but the students weren't doing well in the class. And it wasn't until the professor asked another student to work with the student on their presentation that what the individual was saying became crystal clear. And this is how. He created a visual of what the classroom looked like. And so with the active learning, the students are facing each other. They're sitting in in a circular table, if you will, and those circular tables are placed around the room, but the instructor was still lecturing from one side of the room, which meant that students had their back to the professor at times, and they were distracted with other things, including their cell phones, as opposed to being able to take in what the instructor was saying by actually facing them while they spoke. That's a big deal. If you're talking about active learning, you're expecting that the learning will be better in an active learning class than in a lecture class, because the idea is that the students are working on the material more than they're being talked to about the material in terms of a lecture format. And so that visual created an aid in order to help us understand the situation that he was referring to. So that revision allowed his work to be crystal clear. And so you want someone who's going to be able to give you feedback that will help your work to be crystal clear to anyone, not just someone in your specific field or your specific discipline, but anyone, especially if you consider your grandmother, perhaps. If you're able to explain your work, and this was something that was told to me, I did not originate this. If you're able to explain your work in a way that your grandmother will be able to understand it and say, oh, well, this is what you mean, then you have reached the level of clarity that will help anyone as it relates to your work. So make sure that the committee members that you select are responsive to you. When you send them emails, are they replying in a timely fashion? Or do they just need a nudge? So perhaps you send an email, but you also send a text 2 days later and say, hey, did you get my email? I just wanted to check in to make sure that I'm on the right path. And sometimes nudges are needed because people have a whole lot going on, but you need someone who's going to be responsive. You don't want to wait to get feedback at your defense, because you can only do that so many times. Check your rules and regulations and the policies at your colleger to find out how many times you can defend your proposal. How many times can you defend your dissertation? Sometimes it's you can revise and resubmit, but if you don't pass at all, even a little bit, to the point where they're like, okay, if you just revise this, and that, then you can successfully complete it. That's not good. So make sure you know the policies for your department, for your college, for your university, as it relates to the number of times you can defend your proposal, your dissertation, your comprehensive exams. Those are important things to know. So remember, you need to be flexible when it comes to your committee members. If they're not responsive or they don't align with your dissertation, then think about alternative members or making adjustments. Think about someone who you might have connected with at a conference. Can they serve as an outside committee member? See what the rules are for your department and for your college or university as it relates to having an outside committee member on your dissertation. It's about finding the right fit, not just the easiest option. You want to make sure you're able to accelerate your process when needed. I had to step on the gas when it came to refining my proposal and getting my dissertation done. And so time management was definitely a factor. There's time blocking techniques that you can do. As a full-time employee, one of the things that I did, I would take half a days. I would put in my request to take half a days for 2 weeks at a time so that I could have time to focus and write while the sun was up. That makes all the world a difference to me. I can write well when the sun is up. When it goes down, I can work, but I'm going to have to go over it. It is not my most productive time. It's even better for me to go to sleep at 9:30 and then get up way early at 5 or 4 o'clock in the morning and then start to write again. But you need to block out time to commit so that you're sitting in your seat and that you're writing, that you're coding, that you're analyzing the data, that you're putting your findings together in a way that you can present them to others in a snapshot. You might not be able to share all of your data, particularly if you're doing qualitative research, but you want to be able to present the data in a way that's manageable to others so that they don't feel overwhelmed looking at your findings and your results. Set many deadlines for yourself. Count backwards. If you know that you have selected, in my case, April 11th or April 12th, 2022 as your dissertation defense, then that meant I needed to count back 3 weeks to say I have to have my manuscript submitted to my committee by this date. That means when I counted back further from that, I had to stop coding and say, I can't go any further than this. I have to move forward. So like I said, I was coding up until like February. I had to move. I couldn't stay there because I was coding, yes, at the word level, but I had to stop and I had to make decisions on what I would focus on. And so while I had codes and themes in different areas, I was not going to be able to focus on analyzing all of that data. I had to trim down in terms of what data I would consider. For example, when I decided on what data I would take a look at for poetic transcription, I focused on what my contributors were telling me as it related to feelings. And that allowed me to focus on data that was connected to human emotion. With all that being said, thanks again for listening to another episode of the Black-Liberation.Tech podcast. I am your host, Dr. Renée Jordan. Please feel free to like, subscribe, and share, rate, and review the podcast to help it become more discoverable. And until next time, take care. Bye-bye.